John chapter 6, verse 35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. It was interesting, wasn't it, when lockdown began, what different things people chose to buy in bulk from the supermarket. First of all, of course, we couldn't buy toilet paper. And then there was pasta, and then there was flour and yeast. Couldn't buy flour or yeast for anything, and there are still things that are in short supply. Why did people choose to buy flour? Well, I guess they wanted to make bread or cake. Something very important about bread, isn't there? And in this time of lockdown, isn't it lovely if we have time to be able to make our own? I love making bread. Just a few simple ingredients put together and something special happens. It's a bit like growing your own vegetables. It's so easy in the time that we live in to forget where our food comes from. To forget what the source of it. And making bread, growing vegetables, reminds us that everything doesn't just come wrapped in plastic. But there's also something magical about the transformation that happens. It's almost alchemy. You put together a few simple ingredients: flour, water, salt, and yeast. You knead them. You leave them for a while, and you put them in the oven, and something happens. You get out this wonderful food, bread. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. What did he mean? Well, let me just say a few things that I think might help us to think about that a little bit more. First of all, let's think about incarnation. God in Christ became ordinary. He entered the very ordinary stuff of life, and in doing that, he transformed it. There's a lovely picture of that in the making of bread, isn't there? These ordinary things that are transformed into something special, something important. But as well as that, in saying that he is the bread of life, Jesus is saying that he's like bread. Bread is one of those staples of life, one of those foods that we depend on. And Jesus is saying, just as we need to eat bread in order to live, so we need to depend upon him. We need to build our lives upon him. He is as important to us for spiritual health and well-being as good, nourishing food is to our physical lives. Something that in this time of lockdown we're remembering. And then, of course, there's a link to the Eucharist. Jesus talking about eating his body and drinking his blood in just a few verses from the one that we heard. If you come to me, you'll never be hungry, never be thirsty. The Eucharist, drinking bread and wine, as a reminder of Jesus' presence with us, is right at the heart of our Christian worship. And in this passage from John 6, Jesus is making some very clear links to the Eucharist. And yet, for many of us in this season, one of the bereavements that we have is that we can't come to the Eucharist. And I think that Jesus is saying something more than this. I think that in focusing on the Eucharist, we perhaps forget how important some of the rest of life is. That perhaps every time we eat and drink, there is something sacramental going on. That food is something that we don't value enough. Here, God comes to us every time we eat and every time we drink if we have eyes to see, he reminds us that he is there with us. Of course, that's particularly true and even more clearly true when we eat with others. But even when we eat alone, as some of us are rather too accustomed to doing at the moment, God is there alongside us. And so, let me leave you with two thoughts. First of all, if you haven't made your own food in this season, if you haven't made bread or cake, if you haven't done a bit of gardening, then let me encourage you to do that, to remind yourself of the connection that you have with the ground, with the food that you eat. And secondly, let me encourage you to re-find that lost art of saying grace, saying thank you before we eat, thanking God for the food that he gives us that keeps us alive. Because even in this time when so much is missing, we need to remember the things that we're grateful for. And what else do we have to be grateful for as much as the food that we eat, that keeps us well and keeps us healthy and reminds us that God is here with us. Amen, and may God bless you.